Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. He is currently the lead combat designer at Dan Buster Studios. He's previously worked on a range of games, including Disneyland Adventures, Hitman 2, Halo Wars 2, and most recently served as lead designer at Surgeon Studios on the BAFTA award-winning, just from the other night, little round of applause, the BAFTA award-winning Tales of Kenzera Zao. So here to take us through designing gameplay that aligned with, a lot of cultural influences of Bantu mythology and the personal, emotional story at the heart of Tales of Kenzera. Please welcome Zai Peters.
Good morning and welcome everybody, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today to welcome you to my talk, Designing Tales of Kenzera Zao. And thank you for taking the time to join me as I hope to give you more insight behind the development process of the game. I'll just quickly run you through the agenda of this talk, as there are a few specific areas of the game's development that I'm going to cover today. In just a moment, I'll take you through the key takeaways I hope you can get from this talk for consideration in the development of your own projects. I'll then give you a brief introduction to myself and an overview of the game, Tales of Kenzera Zao. Following this, I'll go over some of the key components of the game's vision. Once we've done that, we'll look at how we took the ideas from that vision and conveyed them through both the game's core design and level design. And lastly, we'll conclude the session with a Q&A. So please feel free to start thinking of your questions during the presentation and raise them at the end, and where hopefully I'll be able to provide you some answers. Right then, without further ado, let's begin. As a result of listening to this presentation, there are a number of key learning outcomes that I hope you can take away with you for consideration. The idea being is that you may find these relevant for your own projects that you are either working on now or in the future and can apply them to enrich the experience. Firstly, let me just preface this with that I'm not advocating that this approach should be taken with all types of games. There are many different types of games, and you need to consider the type of experience it is that you wish for your players to have with your specific game, and determine if this approach aligns with those values. I'm going to cover quite a few things, but these are the big picture learnings I want you to take away with you. I'll explain why we used an emotional theme as a core tenet of the development of Tales of Kenzera Zao, and how that benefited the game. How we pursued trying to help convey the theme through the game's design. The value we got from leveraging inspiration from a little known about real-world culture. So, I'm going to take a moment to tell you a bit about myself and my background to give you a better understanding of the perspective that this talk is coming from. I'll also give you a general overview of the game to give some surface-level context for the things I'll be then going on to talk about later in the presentation in more detail. So, who am I? Without getting into a deep metaphysical exploration of identity, my name is Zai Peters. I was born in the early 1980s in London to an English-born mum of Jamaican descent, but she did spend some of her childhood growing up in Jamaica, as well as the US before coming back again to the UK. And Dominican-born dad. So that's Dominica, this very tiny island on the right in the Caribbean, not the Dominican Republic, which people often think I'm referring to. When I was 2 years old, my mum and dad moved my younger brother and I to the southwest of the UK, to Cornwall, in a small town on the coast called Newquay. So there's a beach I lived about 10 minutes away from there, a 10-minute walk. And that's where I spent the rest of my childhood into early adulthood. So, I think I was around the age of 5 when I got my first introduction to video games. One day, and I'm not exactly sure what urged him to do so, but my dad came home with a Commodore 64 with a cassette tape deck, a joystick, a light gun, and a small box of games. I spent a lot of my time playing games like Bad Dudes vs. Dragon Ninja, Blaze Out, and Batman. They sure don't title games like they used to. And maybe nearly as long waiting for those cassettes to load, or at least that's what it felt like at the time. Anyway, I was hooked, and we ended up buying various consoles and different games over the years. In fact, I was so enamored with video games that I didn't just love playing them. I bought multiple monthly magazines covering video games to find out which were the best ones to play, when they were coming out, and who made them. And that led to then also doing the same on websites when video game coverage spread to the web. I wanted to know and learn how to make them and make a career doing so. Fortunately, with support from my parents, I went to university up in the northeast at Teesside and studied game design. taking skills I'd learned from traditional courses during school and further education, and continuing to develop them with a focus on game development, as well as learning many new subjects and their related software. But what about now? So I've been working now in the games industry for 17 years. I made my start in the industry working in QA, which gave me lots of valuable insight into the development process before transitioning over to design. My design experience earlier on in my career has been more focused in the areas of level, mission, or quest design. So a mixture of blocking level layouts and designing and scripting mission or quest flow. In more recent years, my role and responsibilities has broadened out to game design, working on a range of rules, systems, and mechanics at the core of a game. Plus, also leadership, with the responsibility of contributing to and upholding the project vision, determining processes and pipelines, scheduling workloads, and managing people. I've worked across a range of types of studios, from indie to AAA. The spectrum runs the gamut of single-team studios with a single project and lower production values, to large multinational companies with multiple studio sites, multiple teams, and multiple projects with high-end production values. I'm now only just 6 months into my current role as lead combat designer at Dambuster Studios, but today I'll be talking to you about my prior experience working on my most recently released title while working at Surgeon Studios. Speaking of titles, so the variety of studios I've worked at has led to the opportunity for me to work on a diverse range of games. The games here are those that I've worked on in a design capacity, but there are others I've worked on in QA roles too. The titles I've worked on span a variety of different platforms, whether it be console, PC, or mobile. They include different genres such as action-adventure, spaceflight combat, RTS, and stealth. These games have also targeted different demographics, all the way from young children to adults, which can and has impacted the approach to the development of some of those games. You can also see a mixture of licensed titles, sequels, and spin-offs to popular gaming brands, as well as new original IP. As you can imagine, I've learned a tremendous amount working on each of these games and the unique challenges they've each presented. So let's move on to what those learnings were for the Tales of Kenzera Zal. Just out of interest, have many of you here today played the game at all? Anyone? Yeah? Couple of hands? Yeah, no worries if you haven't. We'll take a look at the reveal trailer of the game to give you a decent overview of what it is about before we dive a bit deeper behind the making of it.
Every story begins at the end of another. Each story carries with it the echoes of those that came before. My Baba, my father, your story was snatched away too soon. My name is Zao, a shaman of Kenzera. Here, I seek my father's return. I will not stop. Kalunga, God of Death, hear my plea. Kalunga, God of Death, come to me. Show me you are ready.
Mouse is crowdfunding, and this?
So, as you can see from the trailer, the game is a side-scrolling action game, comprising of fast-paced traversal, exploring exotic lands, and combat against strange mythical creatures. However, there's also a strong sense of character and narrative underpinning it all. The game is about a grieving boy, Zuberi, reading a Bantu tale written by his late father, The game itself is primarily set within this Bantu tale that Zuberi is reading, of a young shaman named Zal, who bargains with the god of death to bring his father back to life. In exchange, Zal must venture across the mythological lands in search of the souls of 3 mighty beings and must embrace the enchanted masks passed on by his father in order to succeed. So, the game was released for Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series XS, and PC on the 23rd of April last year. And we were very proud with what we accomplished with the final result. It's never easy developing and managing to actually release a game, but we did it as a small startup and fully remote too. Releasing a game is always a significant achievement in itself, but Tales of Kinzera Zal also managed to get a really positive critical reception from a lot of media outlets. Through a number of the reviews, there is a recurring sentiment of critics being touched by the heartfelt experience of the game, as suggested by the quote from the New York Times here. The game has also been recognized by a few different awards bodies. There was a nomination at the Game Awards at the end of last year in the Games for Impact category, a category for thought-provoking games with a pro-social meaning or message. In the lead up to the BAFTA Game Awards this year, the game was nominated for Debut Game and for Games Beyond Entertainment, a category similar to the one for the Game Awards nomination to honor games that deliver a transformational experience beyond pure entertainment, to recognize games with a focus on delivering emotional impact, thematic fit, and innovative use to deliver an impactful message. And at the ceremony just a couple of nights ago, Tales of Kinzera Zal was announced as the winner of BAFTA's Games Beyond Entertainment Award. And this is the creative director there with the award itself. So, you may have recognized in seeing the trailer and hearing me talk a bit about the game that there's already a strong core as to what this game is about coming to the surface. It's not unheard of for a game to be made with a more emotional and or thought-provoking intent, but it is rare. And this was the first time for me to get to work on such a project. I came on board to the project right near the beginning of development. And early on during this time, we formally developed a lot of the vision tools, such as the studio and project goals, quality benchmarks, game pillars, competitor analysis, target audience, player types, and gameplay loops. You name it and we had it, which helped to further refine the vision and communicate it more fully across the development team and with our publisher, and then later on as well to the audience. However, before, there was always this very strong and unwavering idea of what the heart of this game was supposed to be and what the desired achievement was from making it. There's a lot of well-deserved credit towards Abu, the creative director, on that, because not every creative director comes with that clarity, especially so early on in development. Abu had this strong desire to create a game that was based upon his own personal experience, dealing with the grief he suffered from at the loss of his father. It being a means to explore the events and feelings associated with that time, to process those emotions and expressing them through a creative work of art. He felt the only way he could effectively convey this was to take an audience on that journey in a more involved way in an interactive medium. Playing games as a kid is also an experience he shared with his father, making the choice of medium even more fitting. The hope was that this work of art could also help others suffering from grief help process theirs too. At the same time, it was an experience built to honor his father and celebrate his Kenyan heritage, building a world that would take inspiration from the myths and folklore tales of the Bantu region of African continent that were told to him as a child. Bantu is a name given to a group of people that speak a collection of languages from many different indigenous ethnic groups ranging from Central to Southern Africa. The different Bantu cultures contain many rich myths and legends that are typically not widely known about outside the Bantu region. So, before we continue with the other areas of the vision, I just want to take a moment. Both of these aspects were a strong motivator for me in wanting to work on the project when Abu pitched it to me. Conceptually, it was very benevolent and inspiring just to work on a game, or even play for that matter, that could affect a play on a deeper emotional level and stay with them long after they had finished playing the game, and all for a good cause. I wasn't familiar with anything from the Bantu tales prior to starting on the project, but everything I was hearing was sounding wildly rich and imaginative. As a fan of ancient mythology, such as Greek, Egyptian, Norse, and Japanese, I loved being introduced to a new one and just wanted to learn more. It was a tantalizing opportunity to create a game in that space and hopefully do the same for Bantu as what had already been done for more widely familiar mythologies. But there was more to it. I knew instantly at the time it connected with me on a personal level, as I too had already lost my dad and could easily relate. What's more, and I don't think this became apparent to me till much later on, was that as someone of Afro-Caribbean ethnicity and a lineage that at least partly traces back to the African continent, I had a subconscious desire to learn more about that. So, Afrofuturism is a term you may or may not be familiar with. It's popularized by Mark Dreary in an essay he wrote in 1993 titled Black to the Future. At surface level, it's a cultural aesthetic that combines science fiction, history, and fantasy, and is used to refer to media such as literature, music, and the visual and interactive arts that explores the intersection of fantasy or technology through the lens of African culture. In the modern day, it's been popularized by the Marvel movies of their Black Panther character, which was a really useful reference for people to understand the genre that would be associated with Zal. African futurism is a more recent related term coined in 2019 by the author Nnedi Okorafor, used to more specifically define media more directly rooted in African culture, history, mythology, and perspective, rather than the diaspora of the black experience in the Western world that she felt Afrofuturism leaned more towards. These were terms that could be used to describe Tales of Kinzera Zal, so it was important for us to understand exactly what they meant. Abu always had a clear idea of how the structure of the game and the narrative would have a framing device of a story within a story, beginning with the young boy of Zuberi, and through his eyes follow Zal through the journey of his fantasy world. This was also paired with this marriage of two fictional genres, sci-fi and fantasy. The present day with Zuberi, which we often refer to as the Afrofuture, was this technologically advanced African metropolis city, and the world of the Tale of Zal, which we refer to as the Legacy era, which was this fantasy world full of the supernatural. If you didn't know, Abu is mostly known as an actor, and I believe it was when he was filming the TV show Raised by Wolves in South Africa, where he was playing Ori and the Blind Forest on the Switch, that he was set on the Metroidvania video game genre being the right fit for this game. What is a Metroidvania, I hear you ask? So the word Metroidvania is a portmanteau of the titles Metroid and Castlevania, and is used to categorize games of a similar vein. It is often considered a subgenre of action-adventure video games. They are characterized by large, non-linear, interconnected worlds where the progression requires the player to move back and forth through previously discovered areas. Exploring the world rewards adventurous players with secrets and shortcuts. As the player progresses, their character is also on a journey of growth in becoming stronger and more capable of the new abilities they acquire. The world is primarily gated by different player character abilities that are acquired as the player progresses, enabling further exploration. So, why choose the Metroidvania genre? Typically, the games that do strive to trigger emotional resonance or intellectual thought are slower paced and more cerebral. Whereas you've already seen that Tales of Kinzera Zal contains a lot of action that relies on players' coordination and reflexes. It may at first seem at odds, but there are tropes within the Metroidvania genre that served the desired journey we wanted to take the player on. Being thrown into an unknown world alone that is like an environmental spatial puzzle that at first you are ill-equipped to solve, you're kind of restricted from escaping, along with being given enough freedom to be made uncertain as to how to get out. As you progress, the borders of this puzzle expand. This was being viewed as an analogy for the initial state of feeling during the infliction of grief. As someone becomes more accustomed to the feeling of grief, as they begin to process it, they become better equipped with the tools to deal with those impacts. This was being thought of as similar to the character growth through the acquisition of new abilities that unlock the relative gates and the levels of a Metroidvania. In addition, the nonlinear structure of the world helps to convey the nonlinear journey through grief. There are ups and downs, and there is progression and setbacks. So, during the development, we had a fair amount of discussions about what the player fantasy was for this game. What's the aspirational role that we were providing as wish fulfillment? We knew the role of shaman fulfilled the spiritual qualities we wanted, and in addition, the supernatural abilities. We knew Zal was going to be athletically traversing the environment, combating restless spirits, and solving puzzles, as is typical of the wider action-adventure genre. We wanted Zal to feel as though he belonged doing these actions. With Zhao, we combined both the role of warrior and shaman to form a fitting hybrid for the experience we were creating, crossing the combat prowess with the mastery of supernatural power, all in the aim of healing people and restless spirits. This was important as to make sure our player fantasy was in harmony with the narrative instead of being at odds with it. So, as a startup studio with a new team, the company culture was forming as we were developing the game. As the values of the studio became defined, it is recognizable that there was a synergy between the content we were creating and the way we were developing the game. So these were the 3 studio values. So immerse. This was all about creating this binding connection between the player and the player character that acts as a gateway of escapism into unique worlds to truly captivate the player. Illuminate. This is about opening the player's eyes and expanding their awareness through the exploration of unique perspectives in search of what makes us all human, rewarding them with emotionally rich human truths that shape our real world. Inspire. From their experience, players are growing a better understanding of themselves and others, empowering them to embrace change and overcome its challenges. So these didn't just relate to our audience, but it also related to each of us as individuals on the team. This is everything that kind of led up to creating this distinct identity for the game. Find your theme. So when I'm talking about theme, I'm using it in a similar context as in literature, film, and TV, where theme is used to describe the central and unifying idea or principle of the story. Audiences across all media generally don't like to be preached to. The more effective way of presenting a theme is to take a central idea and present one of many possible perspectives on it. It's then up to the audience to then decipher the message and come up with their own interpretation of the moral of the story for themselves. The theme is the creator's view of how to act in the world, and their work of art is an expression of that. Ensure your theme is a universal truth, and by that I mean it is typical of human nature where the idea can resonate on a wide scale, and many individuals can all connect around that theme. Inherently, this also makes the theme more impactful and memorable as it connects on an emotional level. The theme not only helped find an audience for the game, but also in recruiting individuals to the team from all backgrounds, because the theme was universal. Explore the unknown world. Be curious and explore the unfamiliar to be inspired, whether that may be less explored regions, cultures, or periods in time of the world. Draw upon your real-world lived experience to make a personal connection with your audience and to add authenticity. Find how the conventions of your genre and the ideas of your theme connect, complement, and embody each other. Look for the analogies that you can make and the unification you can create through symbology. Create values that you live and breathe in your everyday work and that mirror the intent of the impact you want the work to have on your audience. When I joined the team, my focus on this project was overseeing how we realized the concept of this heartfelt story of grief in combination with Bantu mythology in an action-adventure package as an engaging and compelling interactive experience. How do we build this vision through mechanics that focus on dexterous hand-eye coordination and responsive time-sensitive reactions that can sound at odds with the typical tonal feeling of the abstract idea of grief? At the core of our game design was the idea of these cosmically powered masks that the player character Zhao is equipped with, which he inherits from his recently deceased father. The Mask of the Moon and the Mask of the Sun. Masks are a common cultural item across many African tribes, and there is already a lot of pre-established symbology there. The idea of mask was also likened to the parts of ourselves that we hide or that we adopt when facing deep emotional struggles, such as grief. For us, this was the basis of our toolbox to help overcome the challenges placed in front of us. The idea of multiple masks, each with specific functionality that could be switched between at will to overcome the corresponding challenge. It fit perfectly with the journey of grief we were trying to convey, achieving this in a mechanical and systemic way at a symbolic level. With the Mask of the Moon, we focused on ranged combat and crowd control. And with the Mask of the Sun, we focused on close quarters combat that is more singular target focused. What we didn't want was the player just choosing a personal preference and just sticking with that for the majority of the game. However, we also didn't want to be too restrictive as to the uses of the masks, where everything just becomes very prescribed. So to basically allow the player to have some creativity with it and element of expression. It was a bit of a balancing act in our approach. We could achieve this just in Zhao's own ability set, where some moves in one mask might combine well with other moves in the opposite mask. The other way was to do this was through obstacles in the world, where we presented the most advantageous use cases for each of the masks, and then set up challenges aligned to each of them. Sometimes these might be strict choices and others would be more lenient. By alternating the challenges in their alignment to each mask, we can then encourage a rhythm between the two. what we refer to as the Dance of the Shaman. As you may well know, the player character's traversal moveset is a key component to any Metroidvania game. For Tales of Kinzera-Zal, our aim was to present a character that felt relatively capable from the outset, to coincide with this feeling of facing grief that despite however well equipped you feel to take it on before a loss, it can still greatly affect you. And that, on further consideration, you might not actually have what it takes to not be overcome by it, at least not yet. In addition, it also makes Zal feel like he has a history, and that the moment where the player is introduced to him doesn't feel like the beginning for this character. Zal is a warrior shaman who has been in training for some time already, and he has also had some time already in this grieving process. And we're joining him at this pivotal moment where he feels he can't continue without his father any longer and must bring him back. With the personal journey through grief having these unpredictable ups and downs, we really wanted to capture that sensibility in the traversal and landed on a direction that felt fast, fluid, and dynamic. With these points in mind from the outset, we equipped Zal with moves like double jump, wall jump, and dashing, so Zal feels pretty capable from the get-go. This immediately made the movement feel more satisfying from the start, as opposed to a more pedestrian, stripped-back moveset that you then have to build up. With the combat, we wanted to create an experience that explored a duality of movesets, where we could continue to have this dynamic interplay between them. On one level, it's almost like a puzzle as the player makes decisions as to which mask is best equipped to take on each of the enemy archetypes, or fits a specific combat situation. On another level, Zal, with the mask switching and the kinetic movement, serves as an analogy of the whirlwind of emotions he's experiencing. The cast of enemies in Tales of Kinzera-Zal are largely inspired by the rich variety of creatures found in Bantu mythology, exposing players to new types of beings. Above here are enemies based on Bantu mythical creatures. The full enemy roster also included some humanoid enemy creatures too. We had an initial long list of possibilities, and they presented some interesting abilities for us to interpret and build upon when we researched the different tales about them. Using this information, we could then design archetype profiles for the enemies and then choose a selection that fulfilled the different roles and would complement each other from a gameplay perspective. Importantly though, we also needed to make sure that the enemy abilities and behaviors also complemented Zal's combat moveset, as mentioned earlier, incentivizing the need to switch between the two masks. With the combat encounters, we really wanted to straddle the line of overwhelming odds, just as Zal was feeling, by presenting the setups where Zal is outnumbered and encouraged to move around the combat arenas. All tying back to his idea of unpredictability with this back and forth movement. The enemies are varied, presenting a range of problems for the player to think about, and a lot of them have a fair amount of freedom of movement, being able to give chase and attack from different directions. In many side-scrolling games, you have enemies that get easily contained in areas of the environment due to their inability to traverse it, where it becomes very easy to be safe and just out of reach by hopping up onto a low ledge. This was the same for us too at the beginning, as we had our expanded enemy traversal as a defining characteristic of just like a single particular enemy archetype. However, we found we were losing the pressure we wanted on the player and extended this ability to more enemy types to rectify that, which then led to a more sort of like dynamic flow within the combat arenas, as the enemies could actually follow Zal whenever he jumped up onto platforms. In combination with this, the player is thinking about all the best tools for the job with the masks for each of the enemies at hand, creating this juggling act. In addition to the more common enemies, key points in Zal's journey are punctuated by these grander and higher spectacle enemies with ramped up challenge, our game's bosses. Like many of the standard enemies, the bosses are each a take on different Bantu creatures. However, the bosses are imbued with more narrative connection to Zal, each becoming an important moment in his journey. Each of these bosses represents a key emotion that is experienced as part of Zal's journey through grief. Defeating the boss culminates in Zal learning something important from this emotion and helps him to progress not only further into the world of Kinzera, but also through his emotional journey. So just as a recap, consider how things such as your player character's movement, directionality, and pace can help support your theme symbolically. Look to cultural references to inspire new mechanics or to contextualize familiar mechanics in a different way. Treat bosses as more than just a challenge by developing their character and exploring how their attacks and behaviors can reinforce the character itself. For Tales of Kinzera-Zal, we wanted to present a journey through a world that was focused on Zal's story, to put the personal and emotional motivation at the forefront. So with that in mind, we tried to avoid content that would feel too detached from this core, or just felt like busy work, and tried to make everything more in service of it. With driving the story forward, we also tried to present a relatively strong forward momentum through the world. This is also something that we planned to be more inviting to players who are less familiar with the Metroidvania genre. It's quite typical that sometimes people can get lost. From the get-go, there was a strong high-level vision of the world of Kenzera, both in how it was to be inspired by real-world biomes of the African continent, but also in how these locales were to embody a specific emotion and stage in Zhao's personal journey through grief. These two components were then at the core of how we created the levels of the world. So we have Patakatifu in the top left, which we knew was going to be the central hub of the game world that the player would naturally return to at times as they progressed through the game. We knew we didn't want to have combat here, and the statues were used to reflect the player's progress as they defeat each of the bosses. As you can see there, they've got like tears coming down their eyes, but they start off without those, and this pool of water is much shallower, so it expands as you progress through the game and defeat the bosses, and becomes this kind of a diegetic marker, I guess, of your progress through the game as a whole. We then have the highlands in the top right. The levels making this biome create a steadily ascending journey to the boss at the end to make it feel like this arduous highland climb. Alongside that, there are a fair amount of drops and water rapids, gameplay obstacles, layer on the feeling of anxiety. We have the woodlands, so the earlier levels within this biome are quite claustrophobic to instill a sense of fear. And throughout the levels, they're quite labyrinthine in comparison to the other levels to make the player feel a little bit lost. It features some unique gameplay obstacles like the poisonous swamps and also deadly forest traps to layer on top of the design of the layout to strengthen this desired feeling. And then we have the Deadlands. Deadlands is a very volatile level that's conveyed with increasing the difficulty through the combat encounters with the enemy selection for the different compositions, but also introducing lethal and dynamic obstacles such as flowing or erupting lava flows. So yeah, and just a shout out to the art team, by the way, on this, who were approaching the same goals but from a visual perspective. Although Zhao is relatively capable, we put him into a world that he isn't fully equipped to explore, but he must search and find the additional skills required to bypass the barriers in order to fulfill his quest to bring his father back. At the foundation of the world structure, as is typical of the Metroidvania genre, are ability gates, barriers that require specific abilities to pass through. Finding an ability gate requires Zhao to set on a detour to discover this corresponding ability from an ability shrine to be able to continue his journey. With how this ties to our core theme, it was important to create a mild sense of being lost and not knowing where to go, and also to be able to allow for some freedom of exploration. But for this to then lead to encountering these, at first, insurmountable obstacles, and the way to overcoming these coming specifically through Zhao's personal growth. Ability gates are one of the environmental barriers we have on the exploration side of the game. It was important for us to be able to change the intensity of gameplay and be able to set these contrasting peaks and troughs in pacing that also conveys Zhao's emotional state. We've already spoken a fair amount about the combat, which provides high impact action. So let's take a quick look at the other side of the coin. Along with lower intensity moments of exploration, we have also achieved this by creating environmental puzzles that present more of a cognitive challenge and utilize Zhao's fast reversal moveset and cosmic abilities to solve them. This really suited an aspect of representing his journey through grief really well for us. During moments of this rollercoaster of emotions, we wanted to capture that momentary feeling of being still, being stuck at a point. Puzzles allowed us to have this slower paced and quite contained challenge to allow players to take a moment, investigate, and break down the problem before experimenting with potential solutions. So this is a snapshot of one of the levels from the 2D in-game map. So we use loops quite a lot as a layout element of our level design to guide players back to a previously seen location to create a sense of interconnectivity between spaces and reduce the feeling of linearity. This again calls back to our aim to strike a balance of presenting the player with just enough choice for that mild sense of feeling lost, driving the story forward, plus maintaining a sense of clarity on the layout for people less familiar to Metroidvanias. The red line on the top charts the critical path through this space, and as the player travels from the bottom left up towards the right, they hit a barrier that forces them upwards in the opposite direction. This redirection takes the player up over the top of the barrier where they are funneled back down to the opposite side of it. Here the player will find a lever that opens the barrier before moving on, where they can cut back through at a later time. This is just one example of a shortcut in this space. And if you're familiar with playing any of kind of like the Soulsborne type games, they do a lot of this in their level design. The nice thing about these loops that works well with our theme of grief is how they get players to reflect back on their past experience when they complete them and reevaluate the goals for further progression. Although there is an in-game map to aid them, the player has an opportunity to build a better mental map of the layout of the level through this process. There's also a growing feeling of mastery of navigating through the levels, as sometimes these loops open up shortcuts that create more branching paths that the player can later take advantage of to quickly beeline from one location to another. This world knowledge works in tandem with the character growth. So here's another layout element we use to help convey Zhao's journey through grief, which is sometimes referred to as a bounce. A layout element that presents an inaccessible area that forces Zhao to sidetrack to provide the means to overcome the barrier, before backtracking to the blockade and proceeding ahead. It shares some similarities with the loop, but the bounce requires backtracking along the same path. In the caverns level that form part of the demo, we use this to emphasize the new ability of Bamba's Stone that allows Zhao to freeze water. So when the player gets down to this bottom corner here, they find this waterfall and there's no way up. But they use the ability shrine and they get the ability Bamba's Stone, which allows them to freeze the water. They can now then do their wall jump move, which then takes them back up through the same space. As Zhao is acquiring abilities, it shows him seeing challenges he previously had through a new lens, along with the ability to tackle them in new ways. This was also quite a good way as well to kind of reuse space, but also have the experience be a little bit different for the player. As you can see from the previous paint overs on the maps, those routes were just showing the critical path through those spaces, and there were optional areas that could be accessed either when you first discover the areas, or by returning later with new abilities. Despite wanting to have a relatively clear journey through the world of Kinzera for Zhao, that is centered on his personal story, we still wanted to make Kinzera a world that was inviting to explore, with short deviations that were still in aid of his overall goal. To achieve this, we created a number of branching paths to pique the player's curiosity and entice them to seek out and experience his content. A couple of these activities are more skill challenge focused, pushing the use of the mask switching. Challenge gauntlets, which are a test of Zhao's agility and dexterity in an attempt to overcome a variety of obstacles to reach the reward at the end. And then there are the spirit rituals, a combative challenge that pits Zhao against a variety of enemies through several rounds of combat. In addition to these, we have the reflections, which are these baobab trees. They're a symbol of humility and resilience with hollow dwellings that Zhao can reside in for a contemplative moment of introspection. These provide additional insight into Zhao's state of mind. So you get kind of a bit of a story section every time you interact with one of these. There are also the echoes, which reflect the oral tradition of African storytelling by griots, highly ranked members of society that are storytellers, poets, musicians, and oral historians, who carry the responsibility for preserving the history, traditions, and family stories for their communities. The narrative of the game has the setup of being a story within a story, and the echoes were used to link Zhao's story back to Zuberi in the future setting and connect the two. So we had these gameplay objects here, which kind of represented the idea of the griots in our world. So just to kind of recap some of the things that we've been over. So it's important to break down the different feelings of your character's emotional journey and assign them to the areas of your game's world. Think about how the journey of the path through your level design can help to evoke the emotion of your theme. And create and use gameplay objects that embody the desired emotion and lay them in to strengthen the feeling you're trying to produce in the player. And that brings us to the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening.
So I think we've got a few minutes free for any questions. So if you guys got any burning questions, we've got a mic.
Hi, I'm Natalia,
Hi.
aspiring character artist. I was wondering if you can tell us how many people worked on the game and how long it took from the pre-production to the very end, and what were the challenges that you faced during the whole production pipeline?
Yes, so the size of the team varied. So when I joined, it was less than 10 people, but we were probably sort of between 30 and 40 at our sort of like max. So that kind of ramped up as the needs of the production kind of built up as well. Sorry, what was the other part of your question?
It was how long it took to create the whole game.
Yes, so approximately 4 years. So that was about the development of the game started a little bit before I joined, and I was at Surgeon Studios for 4.5 years. So it was about 4 years of the time that was actually spent on Zhao. So approximately. Yeah.
And the last question, what was the biggest
Did you-
challenge?
There's always the countless challenges in game development. So the first thing was, I guess, kind of being a startup studio was like a huge thing for us. We, no sort of reputation or kind of like infrastructure for the studio or the team at the beginning. So it's kind of like very sort of scrappy sort of startup sensibility. So trying to establish that and also then build up the team as well, make yourselves known, and also attract people to kind of like the project to build up the team. It was also my first lead role, so that was a big challenge for myself personally. So that was the recruitment side, managing people, coordinating with the other departments on like a deeper level was a big challenge. And then, yeah, there's all the endless kind of game development challenges that every game comes with. But a big thing in terms of the actual game itself was the combat. It's something that took us a really long time to try and nail down. We were having problems with so first up with the masks, for example. We had a setup to begin in where we did have more masks than the two that we had. So we had 3 at the beginning, but it was too complex in terms of trying to dynamically, instantly switch between each of the masks. But the bigger problem was for us was defining a specific gameplay characteristic for each of those. So when we had 3, there was kind of a bit too much crossover that we couldn't really define them correctly and have the player understand the specific use cases of each of the masks. So then we brought that down to 2, which simplified things much further, and also the control scheme. Continuing on with the combat was the problem with just kind of trying to make combat not repetitive, and also make it so that the player has to use different abilities and skills to take on different enemies, because you're always kind of faced with the problem of players using like the path of like least resistance and the most dominant strategy to get through. So making sure that there wasn't this one single dominant strategy to face all the enemies, to encourage players to switch between the masks, and kind of reduce, minimize, hopefully eliminate that idea of just the repetition through the combat. So yeah, that was like a huge aspect for us with the combat, and spent a lot of time with play testing and getting not so good feedback at times, and banging your head against the wall and iterating. But that's always typical of game development. And yeah, we got to a pretty good result at the end, which we're happy with.
That's amazing. Thank you.
No worries.
Hi, I'm Georgia
Hi.
Davis. I'm at Lewis Silkin. We help out interactive entertainment clients with legal and regulatory compliance. Thank you so much for that. It was really, really interesting, particularly like the biomes to situate the different feelings. I thought that was really cool. I wanted to ask you, how did you find the experience of working on something that was inspired by something so personal to the creative director and also to yourself? Did you find that challenging, or were you able to draw on sort of your own feelings about that? And would you encourage other people to draw on personal experiences to inspire stories like that?
Yeah, so kind of as I said, it was really good because it gave a strong core from the beginning. As I said, like, not every project I worked on, the creative directors had such clarity in their vision of the game, and you spend a lot of time trying to figure it out while you're in development and going on this meandering path, trying to find that while building the game at the same time, and you've got kind of like this moving target, if you like, which makes things really difficult. So it gave us this really sort of strong target for us to kind of go towards. I think also the strength was having something that was going to be like so meaningful, just kind of added an extra element to the work that we were doing. And yeah, having being able to get like a personal connection from it for myself meant I could really easily empathize and also put some of myself and some of that into the game as we were making it. So yeah, I think it is really, I would really encourage other people to kind of try out the same approach. I think there's also the greater kind of benefit of the social impact it has on players. We had feedback from different players about how it really resonated with them and it helped them deal with their own grief, which is always a great thing to hear back from players, that you've been able to kind of help them on their outlook on life and their own personal problems. And I think that's kind of one of the beauties of, like, as I said, the universal truths is they kind of resonate through humanity as a whole. They're not just kind of specific to a certain type of people from a specific place or what have you. That's what is able to connect us all, and we can all kind of connect with one another on that.
Great talk, by the way. Thank
Thank
you. I'm Callum. I'm a solo developer. Were there any concerns you had with genre before and during the development? Because I know Metroidvania is a bit of a saturated genre now.
Yes and no, I guess. So it gave us a solid template to work with, knowing the genre of the game. We had a lot of great references to look towards and build upon. So I think the main element was trying to find the twist, and we already knew we had this strong emotional core before the game genre anyway. So it was kind of infusing that, how we were going to infuse that with the game genre as a whole. It's kind of pros and cons. So you've got the very competitive nature of Metroidvanias have kind of like risen up, and they're quite sort of popular indie genre that, every year there's always a few released, and it's hard to judge when they're going to come out as well for when your own release date. But also at the same time, there's the positive of, like, fingers crossed, hopefully there's a market for that's serving, those games are serving a need for. People want those types of games, so hopefully you can find some semblance of commercial success as well at the same time. So, a bit of both sides of the coin there and that.
Well, it seems to have worked out. You've done very well for yourselves.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm Leon. I work here, but I'm like a technician for 3D. And just wondering, so if the Metroidvania genre wouldn't have worked, what would have been like your next choice? Or would you have done something like Metroid Prime, like a 3D Metroidvania?
So I guess we never really talked about an alternative option, really. When I came to the project, there was already kind of a strong idea for the Metroidvania genre. Okay. And there's already a clear connection between the ideas with the grief and the narrative story, where we could kind of pair the two up together, really. Yeah. So we knew the kind of direction we were going in. It kind of felt like smaller hurdles, I guess. As I said, like, there are kind of like more emotional and thought-provoking games out there, but they don't necessarily go for sort of like a action-orientated genre. So that was kind of like the big hurdle, I think, for me personally, was like, how do we make these things that don't feel like odds, or we're kind of like saying one thing, but then you're like playing another. Yeah. So, as we were kind of going through it, it's really kind of like pairing up, like, okay, how do we kind of make this still feel true to what we were trying to accomplish on that emotional and narrative side. And that's where we were kind of finding like the ties between, the symbology and how that kind of related to Zal's emotional state, and also how we could relate things to the Bantu inspiration as well at the same time. But yeah, I mean, there's never one way to do things, so it's not to say, there's not an equally good alternative route we could have gone down. But yeah, for this particular game, I think also the type of Metroidvania we're going for was also ideal for the scope and size of the team, and as a startup as well, so that kind of married well. Yeah,
definitely, because it just adds more, an extra dimension.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But no, cheers.
No worries.
Okay. Well, I want to ask a question. It sounds like the game has definitely struck a chord with a lot of people who have, been struggling with their own kind of grief, and it is themed across this kind of, Bantu community. Did you find did you get any kind of response from like a growing audience in kind of Africa or people who kind of related to that community in particular?
I think there were some aspects of that. But even like within our development team, we did have Abu reached out to actually some African developers who were also actually on the team. So we had a couple of concept artists, for example, are out in Africa, which were working on the team, doing a lot of the concept art for the game. And one of our audio designers later on in development who worked a lot on the sound design for the bosses and stuff like that. He was also based in Africa as well. So there was some ties that we were trying to have out there. And I think there was Abu did speak a lot about how his family as well were so, emotionally affected by one, I guess, hearing about how his grief, because a lot of this stuff he hadn't talked about with them like directly, and it gave them a better understanding through parts of the game, but also seeing elements of their culture represented in the video game and being popularized.
Hi, I'm Sasha. I was wondering how you guys went about defining what would be a good player experience.
Good question. So I guess like looking on the Metroidvania genre, and each had like kind of different, there's some crossover, but different preferences and like what we liked about playing those games. So we did a lot of research, like finding our game pillars, which was the narrative, the combat, and the exploration, and kind of looking at like, okay, what made those work really well for us in other games, and what could we bring to Zao, and what new things we could potentially do in those areas. When we've taken that, it was also, as I said before, like doing a lot of play testing, and then making sure that we had these, so not just pacing for the emotional level, which I talked a little bit about, matching kind of like this emotional journey through grief, but also as like a player experience, like the action-adventure genre is very good at mixing things up so that you don't get too bored with like repetition of doing a single thing. So making sure that we kind of have this combat that kind of, one, gave the player an element of expression and a meaningful choice in terms of how they use their abilities, making sure that didn't outstay its welcome, coming back to some traversal as they explore through the land, then also kind of like coming back to a puzzle if we hadn't had like a cerebral moment for a while. So what we do is chart all this stuff out in a big Excel sheet and start to map, and you can kind of clearly see an overall perspective, abstract perspective of the game and how the experience is playing out. And there's just a lot of kind of on-hands testing as a player yourself, a developer, as well as play testing externally, and getting the feedback, because as a developer on a game and you're working on it for like, 2, 3, 4 more years or plus more years, you get really close to it that it's kind of hard to see the wood for the trees. So you have to kind of reach out to other people and be like, hey, like, how does it feel? What are you kind of getting from the experience or not getting from the experience? And see if that matches up with what you're trying to achieve, and then kind of iterating on that and seeing if you're getting closer to the mark as you go along.
Well, I just want to say a big thank you to Zai Peters for an excellent talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much.